Security Agency has been intercepting private email messages and phone calls of Americans in recent months on a scale that went beyond the broad legal limits established by Congress last year. The Times is also reporting the NSA attempted to wiretap a member of Congress without court approval on an overseas trip in 2005 or 2006, but the plan was ultimately blocked because of concerns from some intelligence officials about using the NSA to spy on a member of Congress. The article in today's Times was written by Eric Lichtblau and James Risen, the same reporters who first revealed in 2005 that President Bush had secretly authorized the NSA to intercept the phone calls and emails of Americans without a court warrant. Our first guest today is the whistleblower who originally tipped the Times off about the surveillance operation. His name is Thomas Tamm. In 2004, he called the New York Times from a subway payphone and told Eric Lichtblau about the existence of a secret domestic surveillance program. At the time, he was a Justice Department attorney in the Office of Intelligence Policy and Review. The decision to become a whistleblower has permanently altered Thomas Tamm's life. In 2007, the FBI raided his home, seized 3 computers and personal files. He suffered from depression and is in $30,000 debt. Late last year, Thomas Tamm risked arrest and admitted to Newsweek magazine that he was the one who tipped off the New York Times. Tamm still faces possible arrest for disclosing classified secrets. This afternoon, the Nation Institute and the Fertile Foundation are recognizing Thomas Tamm by awarding him the 2009 Ridenhour Prize for truth-telling. The prize is named after Vietnam veteran Ron Ridenhour, who helped expose the My Lai massacre. Thomas Tamm joins us now in Washington, D.C. Welcome to Democracy Now! It's good to have you with us. Start off by explaining why you talked, why you went to that payphone in the subway system in Washington, D.C., and made a call to the New York Times.
Well, it actually was a fairly long process. In the criminal division, I had been over at the CIA, and I read cables that talked about extraordinary rendition and implicitly understood that people were being sent there for torture. And then I realized that the government was saying that we didn't do that, and so I knew that my government was lying. When I started working in front of the FISA court, there was this separate track of cases that it just didn't make any sense why they were treated differently than a normal FISA application. And I also started thinking about, well, how come the Deputy Attorney General, the second in command, was not able to hear those FISA applications or sign those FISA applications? And finally, I talked to a senior person and asked if they knew what this separate track was, and she said, I just assume it's illegal. And I have been in law enforcement my entire life. My family was in law enforcement, and I didn't want to be participating in something that might be illegal. So I actually went up to the Hill to see if Congress, to try and find out whether Congress knew about what was going on. And when I was told and warned that it's very dangerous to be a whistleblower, and they would not confirm that Congress had been briefed, is when I decided to call the New York Times.
Explain your job at the Justice Department and how high your security clearance went, Thomas Tamm.
Well, I had a top secret security clearance, and then it's followed by SCI, which means secret compartmentalized information. I can't say that word. I, along with a lot of attorneys who are dedicated public servants and very bright, would review essentially applications for warrants to wiretap U.S. citizens, U.S. persons, as the statute defines it, who might be aligned with a foreign country or a foreign terrorist organization or any terrorist organization. And so it's the most highly secret part of the Department of Justice. You have to go through scanning and fingerprint examination to get into the suite of offices. The FISA court in the Department of Justice was literally held in what looks like a bank vault. And it's a very unusual process in that there's only one side that is presented to the court. It is the government side. There's no corresponding defense attorney. So I didn't have the absolute highest top secret security clearance, but it was very high.
And you come from a long line of public servants. Describe your growing up.
Well, I do. My father was an assistant director in the FBI. He was very proud of that organization, although after he retired, I think he started to question some of the things that the Bureau started doing towards the later stages of J. Edgar Hoover's career. But I remember going to the Department of Justice and being in J. Edgar Hoover's office and watching the inaugural parade of JFK. And so I grew up thinking that I wanted to be in law enforcement. And my brother, in fact, eventually joined the FBI, and towards the end of his career, worked on the 9/11 Commission. And my uncle, my father's brother, was also in the FBI, and then he was a U.S. federal circuit court judge here in the District of Columbia.
Your uncle briefed FDR and is credited with giving the FBI its name and motto?
Actually, you know, that's something I learned from Michael Isikoff. Apparently that isn't a book, and I'll accept that as being true. I mean, he and my father started in that organization when it was much smaller, fairly young organization, and they were able to rise fairly quickly through the ranks. And I do understand that my uncle, Judge Tamm, was the number 3 person in the FBI when he was appointed to the bench by President Truman.
The motto, fidelity, bravery, integrity, FBI. Well, we're talking to Thomas Tamm, and he went into a subway, made a phone call to the New York Times, and exposed government spying. Thomas Tamm, I wanted to ask about this latest piece in the New York Times, actually today, saying that the NSA went way beyond intercepting private emails and phone calls of Americans in recent months that went beyond the limits of Congress, the standards they set last year, and get your reaction to this, as well as saying that possibly a Congress member they were attempting to wiretap a couple years ago.
You know, I haven't had an opportunity to read the story. I saw the headline last night on the internet, and then glanced at the headline today in the paper. It's stunning to me. I mean, that our government is still violating the law. And, you know, we have a legal procedure in place through the FISA court to permit legalized wiretapping of U.S. persons that go overseas. You have to be able to show probable cause that they may be are tied with terrorism, but that is not a very heavy burden for the government to make. And I'm convinced, and I think that this article just reaffirms my conviction, is that a lot of more Americans have been illegally wiretapped than we know. We don't know what has been done with that information, and just as we're slowly learning about how many people have been tortured in our name, we are also slowly learning perhaps more about the extent of the wiretapping. Unfortunately, I must say I'm not surprised, because the administration was not following the law that was on the books when I talked to the New York Times, and apparently they still were not following it.
Explain exactly what you leaked.
Well, you know, that's a very interesting question, and I did not actually leak any methods or sources of collecting intelligence. I didn't turn over any documents. I didn't take any documents out of the secure SCIF. All I leaked was, in fact, when I went to the New York Times reporter, I kind of said to him, I'm going to tell you what's going on. You tell me what they're doing, because I don't understand it. And so what essentially, after getting feedback from them, and they went to sources that they had in the NSA, basically I just leaked the fact that we were wiretapping people illegally. It was public knowledge that we legally wiretap. The fact that the FISA court exists is public knowledge. So the only thing I revealed was that we were doing it without going through the court.
Presumably you had conversations about this before you did this, conversations within your department. How did others feel who had the same security clearance and knew exactly what was going on?
Well, I mean, that was something that is the reason I ultimately came forward. As I mentioned, a senior attorney who would review my work said that she assumed that what was being done was illegal, and therefore she didn't want to know anything about it. a deputy in that OIPR learned at some point that some information from one of these illegal wiretaps had gotten into a normal FISA application, and they had shut down this separate track, and he told me that he thought the Attorney General was going to be indicted. And you know, since then, I think that this is probably right around the time that Jim Comey and Bob Mueller were in General Ashcroft's hospital room, and when he was in bed, and they were saying that this part of this aspect of the program was illegal. I didn't know about that going on, but I did know that everybody where I worked who were willing to talk about it, and not everybody was willing to talk about it, just assumed that we were